Last week we saw that God began to move in the chaos of Ruth and Naomi, and that Ruth's dedication to her mother-in-law was helped, and that God's work has really progressed in their lives as Ruth works with God, and that God didn't just do everything for them, but that he expected Ruth to do a lot of the work. And we will continue to see God's activity, as we saw last week, that the Hebrew said that Ruth happened to happen upon Boaz's field, and then that Boaz shows up at exactly the right moment. And we saw that God is moving in ways that they don't understand, and we said that happens in our lives, that God's moving in the background where we don't know what's going on and we don't understand it, but he's doing things, and you will only understand it if you see that whole picture. And so we also saw that Boaz has this name that probably means pillar of strength, and that he lives up to that name. And that the storyteller that we're hearing from and Boaz's overseer have called this woman Ruth a Moabite from Moab. And Boaz looks at her and says, "No, you are daughter to me." And so we see that he has offered her permission and protection, and we will now see that he continues in that, and will also give his provision in a special way. If somebody could read for us verses 10 through 13.
Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I'm not one of your servants."
All right. So Ruth there immediately falls on her face in front of Boaz after he has recognized her as a daughter and has given her this permission and really given her comfort in the midst of all of her pain and emptiness. He is being kind to her, and so she falls right on her face in front of him. And this certainly calls to my mind all the other times in the scripture where we see people falling on their face in front of other people, and in many cases in front of God. That's a very humble gesture, right? We all understand that to be about as low as a person is going to get. The translators tell us that this little cartoon image from a children's Bible is probably what is meant, that she is falling face down with her knees on the ground and her forehead resting on the same. And Ruth has been called a daughter by this man, but she says, "Wait a minute, why would you look at me and decide to do this for me, even though I'm a foreigner?" The Hebrew word that she uses here, foreigner, is not actually technically accurate for what Ruth is doing here in Israel, because she is what Naomi had planned to be in Moab, a sojourner. And those are different ideas in the Hebrew, and certainly different ideas even in our society. But like in all societies, in ancient Israel, there's a ladder of social status, right? We all understand that. We don't like to talk about it in our society. We have a very different understanding of that than what someone like the ancient Romans would have had, or certainly more classical Japanese policies, where people have a very rigid understanding, or definitely even in modern India, that you have a great deal of understanding of this person is below that person. But that still exists in all societies, and it certainly existed in Boaz's. And so the lowest rung on the ladder in Israel is the sojourner. These are the resident aliens. These are the people who show up and say, "I want to live here among you, but I am an outsider and I want to come inside." These are people who have decided they want to live among God's people, and they are then the lowest on the ladder. And you'll even see that in some of the law, that the law permits the Israelites to force these people to do things for them. That's pretty surprising to us because we don't ever think of that kind of thing. But in the law, if there's a resident alien around and you need some water to be drawn, you are allowed to tell them, "I need water." And they are forced to draw water for you by the law. So we have a very clear distinction that these people who are sojourners are below basically everyone else in the society. But We then have, if you see on our slide here, to the right of that big, stark, dark line, outsiders. The sojourner is still inside God's people. But Ruth uses a word that says, I am a foreigner, an other. I am different than even the sojourners. I am a stranger to all of God's people. Now, a foreigner is somebody who's just kind of passing through. They're a person who has come and said, I'm just going to be here for a day or two, for a week or two, and I'm just here to do a little bit of business and then move on with my life. That's the word that Ruth uses for herself, which is pretty interesting because we know that's not what her plan is, right? We know she has said, I am going to die here among God's people. I am going to have him as my God, and this land is going to be mine. So we know that she's not really being technically accurate. She, in fact, uses a little bit of wordplay here, and she kind of in the Hebrew says, you have recognized someone who shouldn't be recognized. That's kind of an interesting idea, that you shouldn't even be talking to me because I'm so low. So why would you do that? Why would Ruth call herself lower status than what she really is? Because she's what? Yeah.
Maybe she didn't know the difference.
Okay, there's a possibility there that maybe she's got a little bit of a linguistic quirk there. But I tend to think that she's doing with her words what she's doing with her body, right? That she is face down on the ground for a moment and wants to make it clear to this man, I'm beneath you. I'm going to get as low as I can possibly get, and I'm going to confess to you that I'm beneath you. And I understand that I have no rights at all. Now, that's not technically right for her, but she's surrendering her rights in humility. That's a wonderful example to us. We don't like that kind of behavior because we want our rights. If there's one thing that is incredibly important as an American, it's this idea of rights. We have the Bill of Rights that we are very confident in. And if you ever watch police interactions, you frequently hear people say, I know my rights. And they will often be wrong, but they are convinced that they have their rights. So for somebody to say, I have no rights, I could claim a right and say to Boaz, hey, I'm a resident alien. I'm a sojourner. I'm over here and I know that I get to do this. That's what she could have done. But that's a very different approach, isn't it? It's really different if you walk into some place and say, I'm entitled to all this. So get out of my way because I can do this. A humble approach is going to be a great deal different and is going to make a big difference in how God helps you. Humility is a virtue, and when we confess that we need help, the Bible tells us God's going to help us. But then, the Bible has the opposite side that we really don't enjoy, where it says, if you pretend you don't need help, God's going to prove you wrong. If you decide I'm independent, if you decide I'm strong, if you say I can do all these things myself, God pulls back his support, and we're told in James 4:6, he opposes the proud. God is going to work against you. And if there's one being who has ever existed that you don't want to fight you, it's God, right? Proverbs tells us that God will tear down the house of the proud. So if you're interested in having God's help, be willing to surrender your rights. Be willing to look like Ruth and say, I could stomp in here and demand things, or I can petition. I can ask. I can submit and say, I'm going to get low. I don't have to, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's what God expects of us. And that changes everything in how our lives go and how people view you. Because they understand that you aren't the person who insists on your own way. And Boaz realizes that. Because as he looks at this woman on the ground, he doesn't let her stay down low. He tells her that he knows who she is. And that must have been a real surprise to Ruth. We've talked about all of the challenges that she's gone through, but he tells her that he knows that she has sacrificed her own family. This is a woman that's never met this man, and he knows what she has done while she's not even in town. He's understood all this. Boaz even says, I've been fully told about you. As if a private investigator had given a folder to him and said, this is everything about this woman. So how in the world do you think Boaz gets this information? I don't think it was the Holy Spirit, probably. Could have been. I think that's right. I don't know anything about this, but I understand that there is a thing called the Saudi Daisy grapevine. It is my understanding that there are a bunch of people who talk about what everybody else is doing on the internet and let you make sure you know all of the business. So there you go. Well, there's a Bethlehem grapevine, and I bet you that all of the locals, the women who are going to openly delight in it, and the men who are going to quietly delight in it, are all talking about these women. And so by the time this woman comes into the field, everybody knows. I bet you everybody in that field looked at her and goes, oh, there she comes. Do you remember that? Did you hear about that? Oh yeah, I heard about that 5 hours ago. And then they just keep going with all this stuff because people talk, right? Especially in small towns, especially when tragedies happened, especially when there's anything that's juicy, right? We got a foreigner who's not supposed to be here. We got Naomi who's suddenly empty and humbled. Boy, that's good gossip. That's good stuff to talk about when you don't have anything to watch on TV. But Boaz, he does more than just pass the gossip on, right? He lives God's law. Now, if you hear some gossip, it's good not to spread it. That's what's scriptural. But it's even more godly to help the victim, right? You don't just say, hey, we shouldn't be talking about that. You say, wait a minute, is that so? Because that person sounds like they need help, right? If they're really having that kind of time, they need somebody to be on their side. And if the whole town is lining up against them, then what's the point of any of this? Because God has made us to be His light. Don't just refuse to spread the rumor, but prayerfully clean up the mess. Work with those people. Change things. And that's what Boaz is doing here. And then he pronounces a blessing over her. Now, it's a public prayer. And we don't know if this is something that he says real boldly or if he's being real quiet about all of this. But he says to her, may the Lord reward you. Wow. What a change. You've just been told that he knows all this stuff almost certainly because everybody else has been talking about this woman. And what he says is, it's prayer time. I'm going to do what I can, but I'm going to go to the one I know can do much more than me. Because what you have gone through is worthy of a reward. You have done something that God is going to look after. He says, I want not just a reward, but a full reward from the Lord God of Israel. Man, I'd be really nervous to even understand what that would be for me. I would think, I don't know if I've earned anything, God. But when you do something like what Ruth has done, when you have sacrificed everything that was in your old life and given it up for God, Boaz knows there's a reward due to you. And he says, God is able to help you in ways that nobody else in this place can. God is able to do things that you would never anticipate, that you would never think possible. And I'm praying that that happens because I know who God is. Man, that's a wonderful reaction to meeting this woman. And he says something that I think is really beautiful. If you know much of the Old Testament, he tells her, this is the God under whose wings you have taken refuge. That's one of my favorite pictures of God. I love that image. We have it over and over again in the Psalms, and you have it a lot in the prophets. You even have it in Deuteronomy, where God keeps using this image over and over again, and he says, you people should take refuge under my wings. You should gather up right up next to me, like a bird with its chicks. And this Hebrew word wings, it's actually the same word for the fringes of a woman's skirt. So The commentators tell us that it's the same idea for an 18-month-old, a 2-year-old, when they're really nervous, when they're scared and something terrible happens. They get right up next to their mama and they get up underneath her skirt and they cling to her and they say, oh, I know I'm not going to have any trouble because I'm right here next to mom. That's amazing. That's how God describes himself. He says, I'm not just going to be a refuge, I'm going to be your caretaker. I'm going to hold you the way that a mother hen or a human mother would hold a child. And that's what Boaz says of this woman. You have taken refuge under the wings or the skirts of the Lord God of Israel. That's a wonderful place to be. But interestingly, Boaz is a crucial part of God's earthly wings, right? There's an interesting way where God's wings are not just spiritual, but physical. And that leads us to the question, are you going to be part of his wings? Are you interested in taking in those people who need him? Are you interested in seeing those people in their hurt and saying, hey, let me help you get close to God. Let me help you understand who God is and feel his love in a tangible way. I'm going to give you the promises, I'm going to give you the verses, I'm going to give you the prayers, but I'm also going to give you anything else I can. Because if you're in this position, you're going to need it. Now, we've not been told that Ruth has eaten anything since she's come into town. She's worked all this time trying to gather food, but we have no sign that she's been able to eat. But now she's filled up emotionally and spiritually. She tells him, you have comforted me and spoken kindly to me. What an amazing refreshment. That kind of feeling is impossible for us to duplicate with just platitudes, right? When somebody steps into your chaos, when somebody steps into your emptiness, and they do just the right thing, they say just the right words, they pray just the right prayer, there's a comfort and a peace that goes far beyond anything else. And that's what Ruth has experienced. And just this little bit of a prayer that Boaz gives to her, it transforms Ruth. Now we see that because of what she calls herself immediately. She has just called herself a foreigner and said, I am not an Israelite, I'm outside of God's people just a moment ago. Probably less than 5 minutes in the conversation. She said, I'm an outsider. And then Boaz prays over her and says, hey, I see you and God sees you. Come close. And Ruth then says in verse 13, I'm your maidservant. What we see is a change in her language that takes her a step up the ladder. That she immediately leaps from being outside the ladder completely to the second rung. She uses a word that leapfrogs over that sojourner that she technically is, and she becomes kind of the lowest natural Israelite. She's including herself among God's people because this one man embraced her. Wow. That's an incredible testimony to me. One person with just a few moments of kindness and a prayer, and this person's life is totally shifted. Let's see how further it goes. If we could have somebody read verses 14 through 17, please.
And at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheep, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean. Do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley.
All right. So between verses 13 and 14, it seems like several hours have passed because we were in the middle of the morning, and now all of a sudden it is mealtime. And this sounds as if it is one of the more significant meals of the day. And then Boaz has given her all this permission and protection and provision, and then he says, hey, it's time to eat. You need to come in here. We're all eating, and you're going to be one of us. Man. Again, this man just keeps on setting us an example that looks really surprising to us. Because Jesus made it clear that inviting outsiders to eat with us is a very important idea, right? When somebody invited him to a meal, he said, "Oh, great, I'll come to a meal, but understand that when you have a big meal, you need to invite some people that you normally wouldn't invite. You need to be bringing in the poor and the lame and the cripple. You need to be bringing in anybody who's on the outside and say, hey, come up over here. Come next to God's wings. Let God love you for a moment. Let his people show you how much he cares." Because when you do that, it shows them that you care, and it reminds you that you're not better than anyone, right? When you've got to have those people that you wouldn't normally have at your table right next to you, kind of hard to look down on them totally. Changes everything. Makes you go, wonder how I should do this in the future. Wonder what we should look like in this. But Boaz doesn't just invite her in. He doesn't just put her at the foot of the table or on the outskirts and say, hey, you sit over there and somebody will bring you something here in a minute. No. He goes and gets some food himself, and he says, I'm going to grab heaps of this roasted grain. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around those kind of hosts, but if you've been around a host who really likes to serve people, you'll see the point where they just keep putting that spoon on, and they just keep going and keep going. And at a certain point, you realize, this is way too much food for me to eat. Well, how do I tell them that's too much food? Because I'm starving. So she finds herself in this position where she has just proclaimed in verse 13, I am your maidservant. And then this man is serving her. What a shift. She's able to eat until she's full. This is in the middle of what had just been a famine, right? The end of the famine has just occurred. As I was talking to Jenny last week, in an agricultural society, this kind of thing would have probably been just a few weeks as the famine is breaking. We're talking about the latter rains that Pentecostals are so familiar with. In an ancient society, people thought about the harvest all the time. As the winter is going on, you've got to wonder, are we going to have enough rain this year? And so you're constantly watching the sky. You're not looking at the TV forecaster to have him tell you a lie again. You're looking at those clouds and thinking, I wonder if we're going to get enough. And as you watch that, you got to have so much rain or the famine's going to continue. So almost certainly, this is going on just a month or two after this has started to come in. And here he is sharing enough food that this woman eats until she's full. But it's not just that. He gives her not just enough, he gives her so much that she has plenty left over. Again, what a picture of God. Again, what an amazing model for us. That this woman, who he didn't know, who everyone's been talking about, he's going to help. He's going to give her a meal and give her more food than she can even eat. And then Ruth shows that she has the character that doesn't just say, oh, okay, well, that was wonderful that you gave me all this food. I think I'll go take a nap. I am stuffed. I just can't eat anymore. I'm really not feeling working anymore. I've been gleaning. I don't need to do any of this. I'm going to go and rest a while. No, she gets up and she goes right back to work. And once Ruth leaves, you can tell that Boaz has been kind of waiting on that moment. He's waiting on her to get out of earshot, because as soon as she's out of earshot, he says to his workers that we're going to do things differently now that she's gone, that she should be able to glean around the piles of finished sheaves. So we're talking about this woman being invited to come up right next to where all of this grain is standing and start picking up pieces, because Ruth's being trusted to be faithful enough that she doesn't take anything that isn't hers. Man, that's some confidence in somebody you don't really know, right? Because she is going to be invited to be inches from what could be unlimited grain from her perspective. All she has to do is sweep a little bit of that standing grain over to her pile and she can have it as hers. But Boaz trusts her and says, no, anything that falls off of that standing stuff, you get to pick up. So she is being trusted for her integrity. He knows what her example has been like. The law has said that she can follow a distance behind the female workers. As we talked last week, you have the men that are cutting the grain down, then the women that come up the next time, and they're bundling all this up. And then after that, the gleaners. Far back, they have to stand so that they make sure they don't interfere with any of this work. But she's being invited earlier to walk up right beside the women, and now she's allowed to go in front of the women. That before the women are even bundling all this grain, she's allowed to go up where the men have cut it and start picking up anything that's not already in a pile. And then he tells his servants, hey, women servants, don't say anything to her. Don't go after that woman and tell her that she shouldn't be doing this. I don't want any of you running your mouths because I know what this is like. I don't want any of you telling her anything or calling her down or rebuking her in any way. You're supposed to let her do this. And then, to make it clear that it isn't just women, he talks to the male servants. And he says, hey, fellas, you leave this woman alone. Now, he had already told them that, which tells you something about what he thinks of his male servants. Because earlier in this chapter, in the morning, he said, hey, male servants, don't bother her. And now, he gets up after she has left, he stands up in public and he says, hey, all you fellas, leave her alone. I've already told you once, but I'm telling you again, you had better not interfere with her. And so again, we have a glimpse of how dangerous these fields could be. We'll see that again even in this same chapter. And beyond that, he tells these male servants, don't just leave her alone, pull out some. Wow, that's kind of crazy talk. Because he's already given her all these advantages, way past what a normal gleaner would be able to get. But then he says, go up to the stuff that you cut up and that you stacked into a pile, grab a handful, and throw it over to the side. Put your thumb on the scale for her. Make sure that she's getting more than she could ever get on her own. Man, isn't that how God is? Isn't that amazing how the Lord provides? To where you think, oh God, I hope I have enough. And then God says, pull out some. Give some more. Yeah, they'll have enough, but I want them to have plenty. So pull some out and put it over to the side. They're not just giving Ruth what happens to drop on purpose. They're trying to provide for her in a way that shows who Boaz is and shows that he knows who God is. Why is he willing to help when nobody else is? Yeah. Because he understands the law. Now that's the funny thing. When we think of the law, we normally think of that as saying, okay, what I need to do is memorize all of these commandments, and then I need to make sure that I have a checklist. And I go down through them and I think, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I make sure that I took care of all this? Boaz understands that's never what the point of the law is. The point of the law is to show you God's heart. And once you understand God's heart, you follow the heart. You don't follow the law. Boaz could have followed the law and said, okay, here's where it is. You go on the edge of the field, you follow behind these female workers, you do exactly what God said, and I will be righteous with God. But if you want to be close with God, if you want to be right there up under his wings, you don't worry about that. You don't worry about what you have to do. You worry about God lets you do. And that's what Boaz is doing. Because he understood that the principle of the law is to provide for the people who can't provide for themselves. And that means not just giving them a pittance. That means not just saying, yeah, I don't need this anymore. I'll probably do okay without it. It means giving them an abundance. Giving them what you can afford to give. Not saying, oh my, I have to give this. Saying, God, let me give more. Give me a little bit more so that I can do something in someone's life. Boaz shows that you can turn the history of a nation by showing God's love to someone. That's amazing. It's just incredible to me to think about a story like this and think, all this man really did is give this woman a good-sized sack of grain. And the history of a nation turns on that. That's just incredible to think about. But you can turn the history of eternity by getting close to God's heart. You can change everything about what will always be by not just saying, God, what do I have to do? But looking towards what God will let you do. Boaz understood that God blessed him so he could share the blessings, right? Like Abraham. Blessed to be a blessing. That's the point. If you have blessings, it's not so you can eat them and get fat. It's so that God will let you share them. It's so that God will say, hey, look at what you could do with this. Boaz invites her in, he protects her, and he provides for her. He models the same love that God has given him, and he acts a lot like Jesus, just like we're supposed to. And in verse 17, we're told that Ruth gleans until the evening. She has worked all day long. She has been striving for this and trying as hard as she can to do this work. And once she has gleaned all through the day, from the very early morning until the evening, we're told that she doesn't say, okay, that was a good hard work day. I'm done for the evening. She says, oh no, I've still got to beat out the grain. And so, we are told that she has the unenviable task. I found a video here of a guy using wheat and a stone for threshing that'll show you a little bit of what this looks like. That a person just takes a bundle of this grain and beats it against the threshing stone. And you do this over and over and over again, because if you think about Ruth, you've been given the rare privilege to have all of this extra. And the way Ruth is, I bet you she didn't leave a single kernel she could find. So I think she's taken that barley and she's beaten it and she's beaten it and she's beaten it already into the evening, and she keeps doing that. Hitting it and hitting it and hitting it until all of those kernels have fallen down onto the ground. And we are told she does that until just the barley kernels are 9 gallons of barley. That's incredible to me. You think about working that hard after she has just marched all the way from Moab. She gathers all of this barley up, and then she has to beat it all out. And she gathers all that together and gets it ready. And then, as usual, our story turns back to Naomi. So if someone could please read for us verses 18 through 22.
And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with this young man, with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted.
All right. I think this early part here in verse 18 is one of those underappreciated scenes in the Bible. Because Naomi is here feeling completely empty. We have no idea what she's been doing all day. She has just come off of this incredibly hard trek from Moab, we've said. And we've also said she's at least 50 years old, maybe older. She has probably not been used to walking this way, especially loaded down with everything that she owns. And she is totally broken down. She's come back to Bethlehem bitter and frustrated. They have no food, nobody's helped them, and Ruth has gone off to beg. And then, picture Ruth coming up the road. You imagine that moment? You imagine what that was like for Naomi, where she's been sitting around waiting, wondering, do you think Naomi thought that Ruth was going to get anything in that whole day? She knows what the town's like. She knows no one has offered to help. We don't know what her thoughts were. But I can't imagine what it was like when Ruth comes walking up the road and she's somehow managing to lug around 50 pounds of barley. 50 pounds that this woman is carrying. We aren't told if that's been for a long distance or a short distance, but she's worked all day long and then she's threshed all through the evening, and then she has a 50-pound load of grain. Now, if you've ever had a 50-pound bag of grass seed, dealing with basically the same thing. Imagine putting that on your head or trying to bundle it up into your cloak and dragging it behind you, and you're on the right track. I can't imagine how tired Ruth was. I mean, I know they worked physically all the time, but I just cannot comprehend, after that much work, having another 50-pound bag that I got to take home. And yet, I bet she was incredibly happy. I bet Ruth was just beaming as she marches down that road. Ruth has this enormous pile of grain, and Naomi sees her, and I bet she has dinner plates for pupils. I bet when she sees her coming, she goes, "What in the world? Raw barley isn't healthy to eat, and it tastes awful." So Naomi's probably thinking, okay, it's time to start cooking, probably pretty late in the evening. But Ruth has another gift. She doesn't just have this 50-pound load of barley, she's got the leftovers. We're told that when she had that roasted grain that Boaz had heaped up, that she was thinking about Naomi right then. Wow. That's some sacrificial love, isn't it? Even if you're full, that you would immediately be thinking, oh, I could take some of this to Naomi. This is going to be really great. She also knew that God's blessings should be shared. And the light has finally started to break in on Naomi's darkness. She's in this desperate position. In verse 19, it seems as if she's kind of stammering. Because if you look at that, it says, well, where'd you go? Where'd you glean today? What's going on here? How did this happen? She's just baffled. She's awestruck. She is just completely blindsided by how much Ruth is showing up with. She has over a week's worth of food that she's brought. She can't believe how fast things have changed. But notice that Naomi keeps praying for others even in her darkness, right? Even when she's at her lowest points in her life, the whole time she's been praying for people. That's a wonderful example to us. If you get your mind and your spirit off of your situation a little bit, it helps out. When Naomi's empty and bitter, she's still praying for her daughters-in-law. She's still praying for Boaz here. And when Ruth answers that this man's name is Boaz, Naomi felt God's love again. God's light floods into her life, and she pronounces a blessing onto Boaz. In verse 20, Naomi tells us that Boaz is their relative. In fact, he is one of their redeemers. And we'll deal with this concept further on in our story, but it means that Boaz has specific obligations to them. It means that he is required to do certain things. But it raises the question, Naomi knew not only that Boaz is there, but that he has obligations to them. So why didn't she tell Ruth, hey, go to Boaz's field? That guy's one of our redeemers. Why didn't she do that?
Maybe proud,
Okay,
or maybe just letting the Lord lead her.
yeah. Any other ideas?
Maybe because of the other kinsman that's coming up.
Okay,
She had to circumvent him.
okay, sure. Maybe she's anticipating something.
If Ruth was a foreigner, a Moabite,
Yeah.
was the obligation there?
It's going to be a lot less clear, but it's certainly a better start. So my whole point is just, if you have an in, Usually just saying, hey,
But
it's
Naomi
better than nothing.
thought that maybe
Sure.
because she's a Moabite, I don't have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is what I'm trying to say.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And
That there wasn't as much of an obligation because she wasn't.
sure. And I think that there's an element where this thought of not having a chance is a really crucial part. I think that Naomi has gotten to the point that she's decided God is against me. And she's a woman of faith. And if you think God's against you and you understand who God is, what am I going to do? If God says I'm going to suffer, well, guess what? I'm going to suffer. Because if you know who God is, that's what's going to happen. If He speaks, it's going to happen. So if you think God has condemned you to poverty and misery, well, that's what it's going to be. So I think she is hopeless. I think she doesn't believe that there's a possibility. It's not that there couldn't have been, but she also knows her society. Like we've said, this is the time when everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. So that means, yeah, you can come in there like we talked about Ruth could have and said, oh, well, let me tell you, this is what the law says, and I'm entitled to have this done, and you have to do it this way. But because it's the period of the judges, we don't know. Maybe everyone would have said, I don't care what the law says. Where's God? What's He going to do about it? I'm doing what I want. We have no idea, but I tend to think she's lost hope. I tend to think that she's in a depression. And when you're in a depression, you don't think clearly. The options that should make sense don't. You're in a severe position where you can't really understand what is logical, what is the right thing to do. Because when you're in a deep enough pit, you can't see the light, right? I think that's one of those bizarre circumstances that we face when we scuba dive. When you get to a certain depth, more and more of the light fades. At about 20 feet, all of the red light cuts out. And as you go down, more and more and more of the light cuts out as the water filters it. And you have that experience where you go, wow, you don't have to go very deep for God's light to change. We have that experience when we're in a depression. You don't have to be very far down for God's light to change, for you not to see it the way that it really is. But if you're in a deep vertical shaft and you're surrounded by darkness, where's the light? Right above you, right? The only way you're going to see it is by looking up. It may be in a point where all you will see is the light above you. You might have just a pinprick. But if you don't look up, you're not going to see any of it. You're going to be completely surrounded by darkness if you keep looking around you and beneath you, if you keep looking for help in all of these other places. But Naomi, again, is blessed by the Lord, and she sees His hand in it. Ruth had to work all day long, probably at least 14 hours to be blessed. What did Naomi have to do to receive this blessing?
Thank you.
Yeah. She had to accept it. And for some of us, that's very hard. When we hear about that, we go, well, that was nothing. Because Ruth had to work in a backbreaking way, a way that's obvious to all of us. She had to sacrifice, not just for herself, but also for Naomi. And when you do that, and you see somebody else who's just sitting there, it's easy for you to say, well, they don't deserve anything, right? Those people over here. But she still had to not shut Ruth out. You ever been around those people that won't receive help? The people who could get something and they won't say yes. There are people who will build a roof over their heads to make sure God's blessings can't reach them. They say, I don't want any of that. I'm going to walk around with an umbrella to make sure that God doesn't get anything on me. She could have refused Ruth's help. But when you're in a pit, not only should you look up and certainly stop digging, you have to say yes to the help. You have to be willing to take what God offers to you. If you fell into a deep physical pit, I doubt you just lay there and say, well, if God wants me out of here, He's going to just drag me out. If somebody comes to the mouth of the pit and shouts, "Hey, you need help down there," and you just say, "Oh no, if God wants me out, He's going to get me out," you're going to be at the bottom, right? For a long, long time, probably until you die. Because God's probably not going to physically lift you out of that pit. He sent some of His wings to come and get you, and you weren't willing. But if you're in an emotional or spiritual pit, you should be doing the same thing you would be if you were in a physical one. Crying out to God and to His people. Hey, somebody help me. I'm really struggling here. And the only way I'm going to get out of this is if somebody helps me. If God helps me. You have to accept help when God sends it. Jesus speaks about this when He's talking about Jerusalem. He says, as He looks at this city, that they have killed His messengers, that they have been unwilling to hear His voice, and that God Himself has been longing to save them. And we come right back to that same picture, like a mother hen, right? That God wants those people to be right up next to Him, and they won't have it. That they say, nope, I'm doing just fine out here. None of us want to be thinking of ourselves as baby chicks, right? We don't even want to be chickens. We want to be mighty eagles or some kind of noble animal, and God says, you guys are little tiny birds. You can't take care of yourself at all. You ever see those little birds? They wander around all over the place. They look like they're little robots. They move their feet so fast, they're just going every which way, and they have no care in the world. They have no idea how dangerous everything around them is. It's terrifying if you're paying attention to them, because you know just about anything is stronger than a baby chick. Probably get a decent group of ants and they'll kill one of those things. And that's why God says, hey, get up under the wings. If you go wandering around out there on your own, you're going to die. You're going to be in a miserable position if you decide to wander around on your own. So one woman works all day and another just waits and rests. But they both get the same blessing. And that gives us our question of the week from last time. Why do some people have to work for blessings and others don't? Doesn't seem fair. Why does God do that? Okay. Test loyalty.
Maybe you get more blessing.
Okay. Maybe it's a test of obedience. Okay.
Sometimes it's what God's trying to do in a particular person. But what Ruth needed to work on might have been different than Naomi. And in both cases, if they do what God asks, that's the partnership He wanted. They're both doing something. It's just different.
Yeah. Okay. What was Naomi doing?
We don't know.
Okay.
She might have been setting up a house. She might have been just getting through the day. That might have been as much as she could do.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing for us, right?
Part of Naomi with her, depression and whatever, they chose to leave
Mm-hmm.
out this country. They chose to go to Moab. And then, even if it was or wasn't her decision, it was a decision that was made. And I think sometimes when you're in that place, you feel like you're getting what you deserve.
Yeah.
And, God's turned his back on me, but I deserve it.
Sure.
I did this. I brought it on myself. I think part of Naomi's journey in doing that was to get over herself.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just have to accept the blessing that you couldn't work your way out of it
Yeah.
because where you weren't.
I think that's perfect. I think that sometimes God teaches us something by making us take something we didn't earn, right? Because a lot of us want to earn everything, right? A lot of us hate the idea that somebody's given you something that you can't point to, something you gave them back and say, hey, I was owed this. But God told us that what we are owed is death, right? We've all sinned and our wages are death. And so, what we have in Naomi is an example of what we have to be as Jesus pours out His blessings. An open hand. A willingness to say, yes, God, I'll take what I didn't deserve. I'll take what I didn't work for. I'll take what only you could give me, even though I didn't buy a bit of it. I think that's part of why her story's here. Because God knows what you need in the moment you're in. And throughout your life, most of the time, you're going to have to work for most of the blessings. There's a lot of ways that you can get those. You could be doing a lot of different secular jobs. You could need to pray. You could need to do all kinds of things that God has told you to do. But ultimately, God's going to force times in your life where you just have to receive. You just have to say, okay, Lord, thank you. And just being willing to say thank you is hard for all of us. But it was hard for Naomi. But it was a challenge because at the end of chapter 1, she said, I'm empty. I got nothing. And here nothing comes with 50 pounds of grain and a whole pile of roasted grain for her dinner. She loved Ruth. She called her daughter. But she didn't see it coming. She didn't understand that this woman, who she saw as probably more of a burden, is going to be the source of blessing. Is going to be the one who does things that she could never anticipate. This light and life of the Lord has bathed Naomi in the pit. And so she cries out and says, thank you, God, that you've not forsaken the living or the dead. Now there's an element where she's talking about her husband and her 2 sons as the dead. But there's also an element where I think she's low enough that she's just right next to it, right? She's almost dead. God knew that Naomi is at this point on the brink of death. He let her get to this extreme low point. But God lets people get to that death point for a reason. We don't like it, but He's in the resurrection business. And for resurrection, you got to have death, right? It's the only way that works. You can't bring people back to life that are already alive. And so Naomi finds herself empty, bitter, filled with the brink of death. But God's power is revealed most in resurrection. Lazarus and Jairus' daughter, or certainly Jesus, right? Those are the moments where God speaks to our deepest fear of death. That who you are isn't going to continue. And He shows, oh, I'm more powerful than that. I'm bigger than your very deepest fear. Seeing God defeat death in front of us is the ultimate testimony. If somebody sees God roll back death on earth, then you know you can have it done again, right? You know that it can be done again. The Lord has promised us new life, and so He pours life into Naomi. But God doesn't resurrect you just so you can enjoy that life, right? He resurrects you so you can share it. So you can be a part of His resurrection business. So she starts to ponder. She starts to plan. As soon as God's light is back into her life, she gets to work. And we see in verse 22 that the first thing she does is start giving a bit of advice. And she says, hey, you do what that man said. You better be good. You need to get right up behind those women and you need to stay among them. Because otherwise, somebody might attack you. And again, tells you just how horrible things must have gotten. Because even in Boaz's field, she says, if you get around those men, you don't know what they're going to do to you. It's a scary place. And it's wonderful that God and Boaz are on her side. Now, we have no record of Naomi ever going out in the field. There's no sign that she ever joins Ruth in this gleaning. She probably couldn't. But she works her way. Could somebody read for us verse 23 as we finish our chapter and come to a close tonight?
Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
All right, so once again, we've spent almost the whole chapter on a single day. That's the way God tells His stories. He gives us all these words about just a few hours, and then at the very end, in verse 23, we have somewhere around 7 weeks summed up in one sentence. And in that one sentence, we see that Boaz's loving kindness isn't just for a day. He doesn't just give her 50 pounds of barley and a bunch of roasted grain and say, all right, good luck. He says, nope, you're going to stay here until all of the food comes in. You're going to stay here through the whole barley season and through the whole wheat harvest, somewhere around April to early June, about 7 weeks. Now, most likely, Ruth could have gathered enough food to last for many months in this window. God and Boaz have provided in an awesome way. Ruth and Boaz probably have a lot more interactions because this is a man who's a hands-on overseer. We can see it that he's coming through and he's checking up on things very regularly. But we don't get a word about that. It's another one of those things where we go, well, were they courting? Were they flirting? Were they just all business? We don't have a clue. No idea at all. But life has begun to bloom. Like those buds on the trees that we're going to see in not very long, right? That little bit of green that starts to pop out after the winter, and you go, oh, wow, God's working. God's doing something. He's bringing something to life that was dead. This is the end of the winter, but the warmth of summer is still a ways off. As this chapter closes, Ruth is still an outsider. She's accepted in Boaz's field, but no sign of it anywhere else. She has no permanent security. Back in chapter 1, verse 9, Naomi prayed for her daughters-in-law and said, I hope that you find rest in the house of a husband. And in the next chapter, we're going to see Naomi get to work. She's going to be looking for some rest for Ruth. But for now, they live together restlessly for a period of at least a few months. So our question of the week for this week is, did Naomi have to seek rest for Ruth? Or would God have handled it?